At his time, Hector Lombard set one of the longest win streaks in the history of MMA. He didn't lose for about 6 years, namely 25 fights in a row, scored the fastest knockouts in the history of Bellator in just 6 seconds, and for his super aggression he was compared with Mike Tyson himself.
Man, Hector Lombard, just a beast. A lot of people compare him to Mike Tyson. That's why he moves forward very, very effectively.
At the same time, the most interesting thing is that Hector's base was Judo, but he easily retrained into an explosive and dangerous bodybuilding puncher, whose big time we will remember today. Hector began his fighting career in Judo, where he became 3 times Cuban champion and also took part in the Sydney Olympics in 2000. Having not qualified for the 2004 Olympics, he decided to leave his homeland Cuba, and upon arrival at the Judo tournament in Australia, he remained there and soon had his first fight in mixed martial arts. He was nicknamed Lightning, and for his rather athletic physique, Hector was very explosive and also absolutely ruthless. Often, his opponents not only missed the endings of fights as they were unconscious, but also a couple of extra punches. Hector always worked for sure. For the first 5 years of his career, Lightning fought mainly in the Australian leagues, where he became the champion of 2 organizations, while in one of them he was able to defend his middleweight championship belt 6 times. He also had a couple of business trips to Japan, namely to Pride, but both times he lost to Akihiro Gono and Gegard Mousasi, both times by decision. So, after earning an 18-2 record, his exploits were seen at Bellator, and Hector signed an exclusive contract with the league. At the Bellator 3 tournament, the Cuban made his debut on American soil. He became one of the 8 middleweights who were supposed to play for the Grand Prix belt and the middleweight championship. At the first stage, Hector got Virgil Lozano, nicknamed the Mexican Machine, who represented the legendary Hall of the Lion's Den by Ken Shamrock. And at the time of this fight, the Machine had a record of 6-1-1. A neat start and a light chop in the clinch, after which Lombard brought his left to the target and the fight was over. He met Virgil with the most accurate uppercut and Lozano collapsed without a chance. So it was more than a confident debut for Lightning, who made it to the second round of the middleweight tournament. A month later, the semi-finals took place, and at the second stage, Hector fought with Damian Stelly, who had a record of 11-2, and at the first stage, he passed Alex Andrade, whom I hadn't heard anything about, as well as about Stelly himself. Damian, from the start, got busy with a jock Lombard in the center of the cage, while going for the feet was a bad idea, as the Cuban sprawled and punched Stelly on the head well. The referee called Damian to active defense as best as he could and didn't want to stop the fight, but the rout was getting tougher and Damian's health was getting lower. So anyway, the fight was stopped and the Cuban Machine again won a confident victory, becoming a finalist in the middleweight Grand Prix. At the same time, with each fight, Lombard became more powerful and more athletic. That's what it means to eat buckwheat, do a basics and sleep 10 hours a day. Hector's opponent in the final was Jared Hess, an undefeated fighter with a record of 8-0, while grappling was his power and he shouldn't have left Lombard to do himself what he did to Damian. The first round went pretty calmly with Lombard's advantage, and in the end he gave Jared a survival course, making him floppy twice with a right hook, but Hess survived and recovered, though from these blows his left eye was already beginning to close and a serious swelling appeared. Jared seemed to come out with only one plan for the fight, to transfer Lightning to the ground, but so far his game plan didn't work and he had no chance but to take the blows of the Cuban jock in a stance. So with each round the mass of missed punches only grew, while Lombard himself was already transferring Hess down and ramming him into the canvas for a change. It was the complete domination of Lightning, who literally flooded the entire octagon with the opponent's blood. We must give Jared a favor. He held on and wasn't going to give up, although there was absolutely nothing he could do. But in the 4th round, the referee decided that there was too much blood and it was time to end it. He stopped the fight, and Hector, having confidently finished off 3 opponents, became the middleweight Grand Prix champion and the first Bellator middleweight champion in history. At that time, he hadn't lost for 3 years, and the series consisted of 15 fights in a row without defeat. At the Bellator 18 tournament, Hector was supposed to fight Paulo Filho in a non-title fight, but the Brazilian couldn't get a visa and was replaced by Jay Silva, who had just left UFC after 2 defeats and came to Bellator to make history.
Number 1. You see already when they're close to each other, Jay Silva, good left hand, the end is there, and that is it!
It was a lightning-fast knockout in 6 seconds from Hector, which in my opinion still remains the fastest in the history of the organization. Although if anyone remembers it faster, write in the comments. Another bright victory for Lombard, who still held the belt, but fought often in non-title fights and intermediate weights, as it seemed to him that it was getting more and more difficult to get into middleweight each time. At the same time, having such constitution, he still remained a very explosive and fast fighter. After a record knockout of Silva, Hector was challenged by former football player Herbert Goodman, who had the funny nickname Whisper, as he was a very quiet and calm guy.
Be nice, bro, is what he said to Jay Silva.
From the very beginning of the round, Hector began to prepare Herbert for a knockout by flying at him with sweeping hooks, and for Goodman, this fight turned out to be not very good. Lombard got him with a right hook and didn't let go. It was a lightning combo and another finish for the Cuban, who seemed to have no competition at all in his division and chopped guys like trees to the right and to the left, many of whom couldn't even advance to the 2nd round.
I wanna ask Bellator for something. Hey, Josh Barnett, I wanna fight you too. I don't care how much weight you are. Josh Barnett, come over.
At one time, Hector was compared with Mike Tyson, and he was so confident that he even challenged Josh Barnett, who was actually a heavyweight. But instead of Barnett, Hector got the lighter and even more uncompromising Alexander Shlemenko as his rival, who always knew how to take a punch and wasn't shy about hitting in response. It was a confrontation between 2 Grand Prix champions, as Shlemenko became the champion of the 2nd middleweight tournament. At that time he was 26 and had 43 fights on his account, of which he won 37 and most ahead of time. Hector immediately swoops down on Shlemenko and covers him with hooks. Apparently he also decided to take Alexander impudently, but he ran a little, adjusted to the aggressive Cuban and starts hitting back. Lombard picks up the middle kick and transfers Shlemenko to the canvas, after which elbows and powerful cannons fly at the head of the storm, who until the end of the round lay under the Cuban champion. Hector was aimed at the old standard, to finish the fight in the 1st round, but he couldn't put the squeeze on and score Alexander into the canvas. Shlemenko starts the 2nd round with back fists and back kicks, and also breaks Lombard's body with heavy middles, to which Hector reacts with a takedown. The champion begins to realize that it's not so easy to pass the storm in the stance. The scenario of 3rd, 4th and 5th rounds was about the same. Shlemenko broke Hector's body in the stance and tried to slow down the nimble jock, who transferred Storm to the ground and precisely scored the necessary points in the eyes of the judges. It cannot be said that Lombard was just lying on Shlemenko, since there was also lots of activity and blows on his part, but nevertheless he was afraid to stay in the stance for a long time with Alexander. And he did what went well with takedowns and control, so Shlemenko gave the most difficult fight to pick Lombard, who won by decision of the judges and so far was the first whom Lightning couldn't knock out in Bellator. The previous opponents either fell asleep in the 1st round or finished a little later, but waist deep in blood. After a rumble with Shlemenko, Hector again fought in a non-title fight against the highly experienced Hawaiian Falanico Vitali, whose record was 29-9, and he immediately declared that he would be the one who could submit the Cuban, who at that time lost only twice and both times by decision. Looking ahead a little, I'll say that for all 45 fights, no one could stop Lombard with a submission.
The bell in round number 1.
Hector started aiming with a right hook, but Vitaly perfectly felt the distance and left the line of fire. In this fight, Lightning wasn't as aggressive as we used to see him before. He was either very afraid of Vitaly or just saving gas. Hector worked very carefully. He tried to put one precise blow into the opponent's head, which would bring him a knockout. This tactical chess shootout, which the audience didn't really like, continued until the 3rd round, and then the thunder struck and the Cuban lightning flashed.
Vitaly's a lot more active in this round.
Oh, good hand by Lombard. That is it. 1-punch knockout for
Hector finally caught Vitaly with a right hook, after which he collapsed and the battle was over. So even though the fight itself turned out to be not as vigorous as Hector taught the audience to, its finale blocked these not the most fun 2 rounds. The last fight for Hector in Bellator was a meeting with the wrestler Trevor Prangley, who at one time also beat Falanico Vitaly and Chael Sonnen, and his overall record at the time of the fight was 24-8. In this fight we again saw the super aggressive Hector, who wasn't going to play chess with Trevor as with Vitaly, and from the very first round he tried to turn off the light to his opponent.
Thursday night at night.
Oh, good left hand. He's rocked.
Prangley going for the shot again.
In the 2nd round, Hector hit Trevor with the most accurate left hook, which was the beginning of the end for Prangley. He was hammered into the canvas and the fight was stopped. So this victory was the 25th straight fight for Lombard without defeat. He won 24 times and rolled out a draw once. After this fight, Hector took rematch with Shlemenko, but his contract ended and instead of renewing it, he went to UFC, where his winning streak and indeed his entire career essentially went downhill. And if, in his debut in a fight with Timothy Bosch, he lost by a controversial split decision, then afterwards Hector got caught on steroids in 2015. He lost 6 more times in a row and ended his MMA career. His overall record with UFC was 3-8 and 1 bout was declared no contest, so it was one of the most promising and failed transfers for UFC, who signed dominant Bellator champion but got a pig in a poke. Currently, Hector is a BKFC fighter and recently lost his championship belt to Lorenzo Hunt. But I think, despite he's not the youngest age for a fighter, he is still able to declare himself loudly and arrange more than one good fight in Bare Knuckle FC. Well, my review's over. If you liked the video, put likes and help to promote it. Also, if you're not subscribed, subscribe and click on the bell to stay in touch and not to miss fresh reviews.